Have you ever watched someone you love become a shadow of themselves, wondering if you should speak up or stay silent? What if I told you that sometimes the smallest voice in the room carries the biggest weapon, and that weapon might be the truth itself? Today, I'm sharing a story that will shake you to your core about a 9-year-old girl who became a detective, a strategist, and ultimately, a savior. This isn't just about domestic abuse, it's about the courage that lives inside children, the power of documentation, and how one iPad recording changed 3 generations of a family forever. The sound that shattered our Thanksgiving dinner echoed through our Westfield Manor dining room like a gunshot. The sharp crack of Brandon's palm connecting with my cheek. I stumbled backward, my hand flying instinctively to the burning red mark blooming across my face, while the 20-pound heritage turkey sat forgotten on our antique mahogany table. 12 pairs of eyes stared at me from around our custom-built dining set, some shocked, others satisfied, all maintaining the terrible silence that had become the soundtrack of my marriage. Brandon stood over me in his perfectly pressed Ralph Lauren shirt, his hands still raised, chest heaving with the kind of rage that had become as familiar to me as breathing. His BMW keys glinted on the side table, a reminder of the life of luxury that came with a price I'd been paying in bruises and broken spirits. "Don't you ever embarrass me in front of my family again," he snarled, his voice dripping with the venom that had slowly poisoned our home over the past 3 years. His mother, Patricia, smirked from her position at the head of our imported Italian dining chairs, her Cartier jewelry catching the light from our crystal chandelier. His brother Marcus chuckled under his breath while adjusting his Rolex, and his sister Candace rolled her eyes as if I'd somehow deserved this public humiliation in our own home. The irony wasn't lost on me that we were surrounded by all the trappings of success: the $1.3 million colonial mansion, the designer furniture, the expensive wine collection, yet I felt more worthless than I ever had in my life. But then, from the corner of our spacious living area, came a voice so small, yet so sharp it could cut through steel. "Daddy." Every head in that room turned toward my 9-year-old daughter Sophia, who stood by our floor-to-ceiling windows with her iPad clutched against her chest like armor. Her dark eyes, inherited from my side of the family, held something that made the air in the room shift, something that made Brandon's confidence near falter for the first time in months. The late afternoon Connecticut sun streamed through those windows, casting long shadows across our hardwood floors, but nothing was darker than the look in my daughter's eyes. She seemed older in that moment, carrying a weight that no child should bear, yet standing with the kind of resolve that I'd forgotten existed. The silence stretched between us like a tightrope, and I could feel something fundamental changing in the atmosphere of our perfect suburban fortress. "You shouldn't have done that," Sophia said, her voice steady and eerily calm for a child who should have been playing with toys. Instead of witnessing her father's true nature, the words hung in the air like a death sentence, and I watched as the color began to drain from Brandon's face with each passing second. His family exchanged confused glances around our expensive dining table, but I saw something else creeping into their expressions, a flicker of fear they couldn't yet name, couldn't yet understand. The grandfather clock in our foyer chimed 5 times, marking not just the hour but what felt like the end of an era. Brandon's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, his usual commanding presence crumbling in the face of his daughter's unwavering gaze. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, but his voice cracked on the last word, betraying the panic that was beginning to set in. Emma tilted her head with the cold assessment of a predator sizing up its prey, a gesture so mature and calculating that it sent chills down my spine despite the warmth from our fireplace. "Because now Grandpa General Sterling is going to see everything," she said with the kind of finality that you hear in courtrooms when verdicts are read. The iPad in her hand seemed to glow with an otherworldly power, and I realized that this device, this simple piece of technology that we'd bought her for educational purposes, had somehow become the instrument of our salvation. Brandon's family began to shift uncomfortably in their leather chairs, their designer clothes and expensive jewelry suddenly feeling more like costumes than symbols of status. The truth was crystallizing in the room like ice forming on a winter window, beautiful and terrifying and absolutely inevitable. "I've been recording you, Daddy," Sophia continued, her small voice carrying the weight of impending justice that would reshape our family forever. "Everything, for weeks, and I sent it all to Grandpa this morning." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Patricia's wineglass slipping from her manicured fingers and shattering against our marble floor. Brandon's family began to understand that something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong, that the perfect facade they'd helped maintain was about to crumble in the most public and devastating way possible. Marcus loosened his silk tie, as if he couldn't breathe, while Candace's face went white beneath her professional makeup. The reckoning they'd never seen coming was standing in our living room in the form of a 9-year-old girl with an iPad and a plan that was about to change everything. 3 hours earlier, I had been standing in that same gourmet kitchen with its granite countertops and professional-grade appliances, methodically basting our 20-pound heritage turkey while my hands trembled with exhaustion that went bonk. The bruise on my ribs from last week's lesson still ached with every movement as I reached into our oversized Sub-Zero refrigerator. But I couldn't let the pain show, not with Brandon's family arriving in their convoy of luxury vehicles for our annual Thanksgiving performance. The medical bills from my latest accident were still sitting unpaid on Brandon's mahogany desk upstairs, totaling $6,500 that he'd blamed me for incurring when I carelessly fell down the stairs. Our kitchen, featured in Better Homes and Gardens just 2 years ago, felt more like a stage where I performed the role of the perfect suburban wife, complete with designer apron and fake smile. "Victoria, where the hell are my Italian leather shoes?" Brandon's voice boomed from our master suite upstairs, the sound carrying through our open floor plan like thunder announcing an approaching storm. I flinched, despite myself, nearly dropping the expensive basting brush that had cost more than some people's weekly groceries. "In the walk-in closet, honey, left side, bottom shelf, next to your Armani loafers," I called back, my voice carefully modulated to avoid triggering another explosion that might leave me explaining away new bruises to the emergency room doctors. Our house, with its soaring ceilings and designer lighting, seemed to amplify every sound, every footstep, every slammed door, every cruel word that Brandon used to chip away at what remained of my soul. The irony wasn't lost on me that we lived in one of Connecticut's most prestigious neighborhoods, surrounded by success and luxury. Yet, I felt more trapped than if we'd been living in a prison cell. Sophia sat at our kitchen island with its imported marble surface, supposedly working on her math homework, but I knew she was watching me with those intelligent eyes that missed absolutely nothing. At 9 years old, she had learned to read the warning signs better than I ever had. The particular set of Brandon's shoulders when he walked through our front door after a difficult day at Sterling Capital Management. The dangerous way he cleared his throat before launching into one of his tirades. The ominous quiet that preceded his worst moments, like the calm before a hurricane. She understood the geography of our house better than any adult guest ever would, knowing which floorboards creaked and might give away her presence, which corners provided the best hiding spots, which doors she could slip through unnoticed. When Brandon's anger reached its peak, her backpack sat beside her, always packed with essentials, a habit she'd developed without any prompting from me, as if her young mind had already begun preparing for the day we might need to leave quickly. "Mom," she said softly, not looking up from her worksheet filled with multiplication problems that seemed insignificant compared to the complex calculations running through her mind. "Are you okay?" The question hit me like a physical blow, as it did every time she asked, and she asked more frequently now, her concern growing with each passing week. How many times had I lied to this brilliant child, telling her that everything was fine while sporting makeup to cover fingerprint bruises on my arms? How many times had I explained away my tears, my flinches, my sudden silences, as anything other than what they really were? The weight of those lies sat heavy in my chest as I looked at her bent head, her dark hair falling forward to hide expressions too mature for someone who should still believe in fairy tales and happy endings. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I whispered, the lie bitter on my tongue as I reached for the expensive seasonings in our spice cabinet that Brandon had insisted on organizing in alphabetical order. Sophia's pencils stilled against her homework, and in that moment of silence, I could feel her processing my words, weighing them against the evidence of her own eyes. "No, you're not," she said quietly, her voice carrying a certainty that made my hands freeze in their task. Before I could respond, before I could construct another lie to protect her innocence, Brandon's heavy footsteps thundered down our custom hardwood stairs, each step announcing his approach like a countdown to disaster. "Victoria, this house looks like absolute garbage," he began, his voice echoing through our open-concept living space. "My mother is going to be here in an hour, and you can't even manage to." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Sophia watching him, her iPad now in her lap, her eyes recording everything with the intensity of a court stenographer. For just a brief moment, something that might have been shame flickered across Brandon's features as he took in the scene. His wife cowering by the stove, his daughter watching with obvious concern, the tension thick enough to cut with our imported German knives. But the moment passed so quickly, I might have imagined it, replaced by the cold calculation that had become his default expression whenever Sophia was present. "Sophia, go to your room," he said curtly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "But Dad, I'm doing homework like you told me to," she replied, her voice steady despite the obvious tension in the room. "Yeah, well, do it upstairs," he commanded. But Sophia gathered her books slowly, deliberately, as if she were giving me time to prepare for whatever was coming next. As she passed by my position at the kitchen island, she squeezed my hand, a tiny gesture of solidarity that nearly shattered what remained of my composure. At the doorway leading to our curved staircase with its wrought iron banister, Sophia paused and turned back to face Brandon, with a courage that took my breath away. "Be nice to Mom," she said simply, her 9-year-old voice carrying more authority than most adults could muster in similar circumstances. Brandon's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists beside our $3,000 espresso machine. And I could see the dangerous flash in his eyes that preceded his worst moments. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dropping to that deadly whisper that never failed to make my blood run cold. Sophia stood her ground in our doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun streaming through our expensive stained glass windows, looking like a tiny warrior preparing for battle. "She's been cooking all day, even though she's tired and hurt from when you pushed her into the refrigerator yesterday. So just ... be nice." The audacity of it, a 9-year-old child standing up to her father in defense of her mother, left Brandon momentarily speechless. But I could see the rage building behind his eyes like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The silence stretched between them while I stood frozen by our 6-burner gas range, torn between pride in my daughter's bravery and terror at what her defiance might cost us both. Our kitchen, with its designer lighting and expensive fixtures, suddenly felt more like a courtroom where a child was about to face judgment for the crime of telling the truth. "Sophia, go," I said quickly, trying to diffuse the situation before Brandon's anger could find its target. She nodded, but not before I caught the determined set of her jaw, an expression I recognized from my own father, General Sterling. Whenever he was preparing for battle, that resemblance had never been more pronounced than in that moment. As if 3 generations of military strength had somehow concentrated itself in this small girl who refused to back down from a bully, even when that bully was her own father. "That kid is getting way too mouthy," Brandon muttered as soon as Sophia disappeared up our stairs, his attention turning back to me with renewed intensity. "You're raising her to be disrespectful, to question authority, to think she has opinions that matter." His words stung because they revealed how little he understood about the child we were raising together, how he saw her growing confidence and intelligence as threats rather than gifts to be nurtured. "She's just protective," I said carefully, choosing my words like a diplomat navigating a minefield. "She doesn't like seeing Buff trailed off." Unable to finish the sentence that would have acknowledged the truth we'd all been dancing around, seeing what Brandon's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper that made every nerve in my body scream warnings. "Are you telling her stories about us, Victoria? Are you poisoning my daughter against me with your dramatic interpretations of perfectly normal marital disagreements?" "No, Brandon, I would never do that," I stammered, my hands gripping the granite countertop so tightly my knuckles went white. The truth was that I never had to tell Sophia anything. She witnessed it all firsthand, catalogued every cruel word and violent gesture with the precision of a court reporter. "Because if you are," Brandon continued, stepping closer until I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the underlying scent of anger, "if you're turning my daughter into some kind of spy, filling her head with ideas about what constitutes normal family dynamics, there will be consequences, serious consequences." His use of the word "my" when referring to Sophia never failed to cut deep, as if I had no claim to the child I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through every illness, comforted through every nightmare, and loved with every fiber of my being. The doorbell chimed at that moment, its melodic sound echoing through our marble foyer and temporarily saving me from having to respond to threats that were becoming more specific and more frightening with each passing day. Brandon straightened, his designer tie and transformed instantly into the charming husband, son, and brother-in-law that his family knew and loved. The switch was so seamless and practiced, it was terrifying, like watching an actor slip into a role he'd perfected over years of performances. "Showtime," he said with a cold smile that never reached his eyes, his hand briefly touching the small of my back in what would look like an affectionate gesture to any observer but felt more like a warning. "Remember, Victoria, today we are the perfect family, living the perfect life in our perfect home. Loving husband, devoted wife, well-behaved child who knows her place in the family hierarchy. Can you manage that performance, or do I need to give you some motivation to stay in character?" The implied threat hung in the air between us as I nodded mutely, already slipping into the role I'd been forced to perfect over the past 3 years. The grateful wife who had married up. The woman who knew how lucky she was to live in this beautiful house, to wear designer clothes, to be part of such a successful and respected family. From upstairs, I could hear the soft sound of Sophia's bedroom door closing, but something told me she was listening to every word, processing every nuance of this conversation that revealed so much about the dynamics that ruled our household. As Brandon walked toward our front door with its expensive stained glass panels, I caught a glimpse of Sophia's reflection in the hallway mirror, her iPad in her hands, positioned just so at the top of our stairs. The sight should have worried me. The idea that my 9-year-old daughter was becoming someone who documented rather than simply lived her childhood experiences. But instead, I felt a strange sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she was seeing what I had been too afraid to acknowledge, that this wasn't normal, that this wasn't love, and that someone needed to start keeping score of all the ways Brandon was failing as a husband and father. Brandon's family descended upon our Westfield Manor home like a plague of well-dressed locusts, each arriving in vehicles that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Patricia in her silver Mercedes S-Class Marcus, and Isabella in their black BMW 7 Series, and Candace in her white Audi Q8, they swept through our front entrance with its imported Italian marble floors, each family member carrying their own arsenal of passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled insults disguised as concern or advice. Patricia, Brandon's mother, led the charge in her Chanel suit and pearls, her critical gaze immediately scanning our professionally decorated home for any flaw she could use as ammunition later. "Oh, Victoria dear," she said in that syrupy tone that managed to drip with condescension despite its superficial sweetness. "You've done something different with the dining room decorations. How, rustic and homey. I suppose not everyone has access to a professional interior designer." I had spent 3 sleepless days perfecting those decorations, hand-selecting each element to create the kind of warm, welcoming atmosphere that magazines featured in their holiday spreads. Marcus arrived next with his wife Isabella, both sporting designer clothes that cost more than some families spent on Christmas presents, their superior smirks already in place before they'd crossed our threshold. "Something smells incredible in here," Marcus announced as he handed his cashmere coat to our housekeeper. Then added under his breath, but loud enough for me to hear, "Victoria must have finally learned to follow a recipe properly." Isabella shot him a look that might have been disapproval, but she didn't contradict him, didn't defend me, didn't acknowledge that I'd been cooking elaborate meals for years without recognition or appreciation. The real barb came from Candace, Brandon's sister, who made an elaborate show of hugging me in front of everyone while whispering directly into my ear. "You look absolutely exhausted, Victoria. Dark circles under your eyes, stress lines around your mouth. Brandon always says that wives who can't handle the pressure age faster than those who know how to take care of themselves and their families." I forced a smile that felt like it might crack my face and nodded graciously, playing my assigned role in this twisted theater production where I was simultaneously the host and the target. But from my peripheral vision, I noticed Sophia standing in the doorway between our kitchen and living room, her iPad positioned casually in her hands, those sharp eyes cataloging every slight, every cruel comment, every moment when her father failed to defend her mother against his family's systematic cruelty. Her presence gave me strength I didn't know I still possessed, reminding me that I wasn't completely alone in this house, that someone was witnessing these interactions and might someday understand the full scope of what I endured for the sake of keeping our family intact. The afternoon sun streamed through our floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in a golden glow that made our home look picture-perfect, while concealing the emotional carnage taking place in plain sight. Throughout the pre-dinner cocktail hour, the pattern continued with surgical precision. each family member taking turns to diminish me while Brandon basked in their attention and approval. They gathered around our stone fireplace with their expensive wine and artisanal appetizers, discussing Marcus's latest business acquisition, Candace's recent promotion at her law firm, and Patricia's upcoming charity gala. All subjects that somehow managed to highlight my own lack of professional achievements or social standing. "Victoria's always been so wonderfully simple," Patricia observed while sipping from our finest crystal stemware, "not burdened with too much education or career ambition. Brandon really rescued her from a very ordinary life, didn't he? Such a generous heart, taking on someone who might never have amounted to much on her own." Brandon didn't contradict her assessment, didn't defend my intelligence or accomplishments, didn't mention that I'd been accepted to nursing school before. He convinced me that my place was at home supporting his career instead of pursuing my own dreams. "Remember when Victoria tried to go back to school?" Candace laughed, her voice carrying easily through our open floor plan. "What was it? Nursing, or something equally impractical?" Brandon had to put his foot down, help her understand that someone needed to focus on the family, on creating a stable home environment. That wasn't how it had happened at all. I'd been accepted into a competitive nursing program and had dreams of financial independence, of a career that would give me purpose beyond managing Brandon's social calendar and maintaining his image. But Brandon had sabotaged my application by forgetting to submit my transcripts, then convinced me I was too stupid to succeed in such a demanding field, that I would embarrass him and our family by failing publicly. Still, I said nothing, smiled pleasantly, and refilled their wine glasses, pretending their words didn't slice through me like the expensive carving knives in our kitchen drawer. Sophia, however, had stopped engaging in the polite small talk that 9-year-olds typically offered to visiting relatives. She sat rigid on our leather sofa, her small hands clenched in her lap, her iPad resting beside her like a weapon waiting to be deployed. She was watching her father's family systematically tear her mother apart, piece by piece, word by carefully chosen word, and I could see something changing in her expression, a hardening, a resolve forming like steel being forged in fire. The breaking point came when Marcus started boasting about Isabella's recent promotion to partner at her prestigious law firm. "Isabella's making senior partner this year," he announced with obvious pride, raising his wine glass in a toast. "Of course, she's always been the ambitious type, never content to just exist." The word exist hung in the air like a slap, its implication clear to everyone in the room. And even Isabella looked uncomfortable with her husband's casual cruelty, directed at me. "That's wonderful news," I said genuinely, because despite the context and the implied insult, I was truly happy for any woman succeeding in her chosen career field. My response seemed to surprise them. Perhaps they expected resentment or defensiveness instead of sincere congratulations. "It really is quite refreshing," Patricia chimed in, seizing the opportunity to drive the knife deeper. "To see a woman with actual drive and intelligence making something meaningful of her life. Don't you think so, Brandon? Isn't it inspiring to witness what women can accomplish when they have real substance and ambition?" I watched Brandon's eyes meet mine across our dining table, and in that moment I saw the calculation taking place behind his gaze. The conscious choice between defending his wife or maintaining his family's approval and continuing their cruel entertainment. He chose them, just as he always chose them, just as I knew he would. "Absolutely," he said, raising his crystal wine glass with a smile that felt like a blade sliding between my ribs. "Two strong, successful women who make the most of their opportunities and refuse to settle for mediocrity. The toast wasn't for me, would never be for me, could never include someone like me in their definition of worthy womanhood." I excused myself to our gourmet kitchen, needing a moment to breathe, to collect the scattered pieces of my dignity that lay broken across our dining room floor like shattered glass. Through the doorway, I could hear them continuing their assault in my absence, their voices carrying easily through our open floor plan. "She's gotten incredibly sensitive lately," Brandon was saying, his tone suggesting that my emotional responses to their cruelty were somehow unreasonable or manipulative. "Honestly, I don't know how much more of this drama and mood swings I can handle. It's exhausting being married to someone who takes everything so personally." "You're absolutely saint for putting up with it," his mother replied, her voice full of sympathy for her poor son's burden. "Most men wouldn't tolerate such emotional instability." such constant neediness and attention-seeking behavior. That's when Sophia's voice cut through their laughter like a blade forged in righteous fury. Why do you all hate my mom? The dining room fell silent so suddenly, it was like someone had switched off a radio mid. I pressed myself against the kitchen wall, my heart hammering in my chest as I realized my 9-year-old daughter had reached her breaking point and was about to engage in battle with adults who had decades of experience in psychological warfare. Sophia, honey, Brandon's voice was strained, trying to maintain his reasonable father persona. We don't hate anyone. Sometimes adults have complicated conversations that children don't fully understand. Yes, you do hate her, Sophia interrupted, her voice steady and clear as crystal, cutting through his patronizing explanation like truth cuts through lies. You say mean things about her intelligence, about her worth, about everything she does. You make her sad on purpose. You make her cry when you think I'm not watching or listening. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stifle the sound that wanted to escape, part sob, part gasp of recognition that my daughter had been witnessing far more than I'd realized. Cataloging every cruel moment with the precision of a court stenographer. Sweetheart, Patricia's voice was sickeningly sweet, the tone adults use when they're about to manipulate a child. Sometimes adults have complicated relationships that involve discussions about improvement and growth. We only want what's best for your mother, to help her become the best version of herself. My mom is already the smartest person I know, Sophia continued, gathering momentum like a small locomotive building steam. She helps me with my homework every single night, even when she's tired from cleaning and cooking all day. She builds things and fixes things and knows about science and books and history and everything that matters. She's kind to everyone, even when they're mean to her, even when they don't deserve kindness, even when they hurt her feelings on purpose because she's trying to make everyone happy and comfortable. The silence stretched taut as a violin string, ready to snap. Through the doorway, I could see Sophia standing beside our antique sideboard, her iPad clutched against her chest, facing down a room full of adults with the fearlessness of someone who had nothing left to lose. She cooks your food and cleans up your messes and smiles when you hurt her feelings because she's trying to make everyone feel welcome and loved. But none of you even see her as a real person. You just see someone to be mean to, someone to make jokes about, someone whose feelings don't matter because she's not important enough to deserve basic respect. Sophia, that's quite enough. Brandon's voice held a warning that would have silenced most children. But our daughter had inherited something from my father's side of the family. The inability to back down when confronting injustice. No, Daddy, it's not enough, she replied, her voice rising with passion and fury. It's not enough that you make Mom sad every single day. It's not enough that you yell at her and call her stupid and worthless. It's not enough that you hurt her physically and emotionally. Someone needs to say something. Someone needs to stand up for her, since none of the adults in this family will do it. My blood turned to ice water in my veins as I realized she had seen and understood far more than I had ever wanted her to witness, far more than any child should have to process about her parents' relationship. I heard Brandon's chair scrape back violently, the sound echoing through our house like a gunshot. Go to your room immediately, he commanded, his voice deadly quiet in that way that preceded his worst explosions of violence. I don't want to go to my room, Sophia replied with breathtaking defiance. I want you to apologize to my mother and stop being mean to her. I said now, Brandon roared, and I heard his palms slam against our dining table with such force that the wine glasses jumped and rattled against each other. That's when I rushed back into the dining room, unable to let my daughter face his anger alone, unable to be a coward for one more second while she showed more courage than I'd displayed in years. Brandon, please, I said, stepping between him and Sophia, my body physically shielding my daughter from his rage. She's just a child who doesn't fully understand adult relationships and dynamics. But even as I spoke the words, I knew they were lies. Sophia understood perfectly, perhaps better than I did, certainly more clearly than I was willing to admit to myself. Doesn't understand what. His eyes were blazing now, his carefully constructed facade finally cracking in front of his family like a mask falling away to reveal the monster underneath. Doesn't understand that her mother is a pathetic, weak, ungrateful woman who doesn't appreciate everything I've given her. Don't call her that. Sophia's voice rose fierce and protective, surprising everyone in the room, including herself. Don't you dare call my mom names. She's not pathetic or weak. She's brave and strong and beautiful, and she deserves better than you. I'll call her whatever I damn well please, Brandon roared, advancing on both of us with murder in his eyes. This is my house, my family, and you'll— What? I found myself saying, my own breaking point finally reached after years of swallowing my pride and dignity. Hit a 9-year-old child in front of your family. Show them all what you really are when no one's watching. The room went deadly silent as the words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that couldn't be extinguished. Brandon's family stared at us as if seeing us clearly for the first time, puzzle pieces clicking into place in their minds as they began to understand what they had been complicit in creating and maintaining. Brandon's face contorted with rage and something that might have been fear. Fear that his secret was finally being exposed. Fear that his perfect image was crumbling beyond repair. How dare you, he whispered, his voice carrying more menace than any shout. How dare you try to make me look like some kind of monster when all I've ever done is provide for you, give you a life most women would kill for, put up with your constant neediness and emotional instability, like someone who terrorizes his own wife and child, I continued, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Years of suppressed truth finally finding their voice, like someone who uses his size and strength to intimidate and control, like someone who hurts the people who should be able to trust him most. That's when his hand came up in that familiar arc I'd learned to recognize and duck away from. But this time I didn't move, didn't cower, didn't try to make myself smaller. The world exploded into pain and humiliation as his palm connected with my cheek in front of witnesses, in front of his family, in front of our daughter who was recording everything with the dedication of a war correspondent, documenting atrocities. The sound echoed through our home like thunder. And in the ringing silence that followed, I could hear something fundamental shifting in the universe around us. And that's when Sophia stepped forward with her iPad held high and changed everything forever. Daddy, she said, her 9-year-old voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. You really shouldn't have done that where everyone could see, because now Grandpa General Sterling is going to watch it happen too, and he's already on his way here. The transformation in the room was immediate and electric, like the moment before lightning strikes when the air itself seems to vibrate with impending destruction. Brandon's confident posture crumbled as if his skeleton had suddenly turned to sand, and his family exchanged panicked glances as they began to realize that their casual cruelty had consequences they hadn't considered. What are you talking about? Brandon demanded, but his voice cracked like a teenager's, betraying the terror that was beginning to take hold. Sophia held up her iPad, the screen glowing with dozens of video files, each one time-stamped and organized with military precision. I've been recording you for weeks, Daddy. Every time you hurt Mom, every time you call her names, every time you make her cry, every time you show everyone who you really are when you think no one important is watching. The blood drained from Brandon's face as he stared at the device that had betrayed him. The technology he'd bought for his daughter's education, now serving as the instrument of his downfall. I recorded you grabbing Mom by the throat last Tuesday. I recorded you throwing the coffee mug at her head on Wednesday. I recorded you pushing her so hard she hit the refrigerator and left a dent that's still there. I recorded you slapping her this morning before your family arrived. Sophia continued with devastating calm, scrolling through her evidence with the efficiency of a prosecutor presenting a case. And I sent everything to Grandpa General Sterling this morning, along with photos of Mom's bruises and a detailed report I've been keeping about dates and times and what happened each time. Patricia gasped, her wine glass slipping from her manicured fingers to shatter against our marble floor. Marcus looked like he might be sick, while Candace had gone completely pale beneath her professional makeup. They were beginning to understand that their dismissive comments about my sensitivity and emotional instability had been covering up something.